Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Grad Coach TV, where we demystify and simplify the oftentimes complex world of academic research. Today, two of our seasoned research coaches, Phair and Ruth Coetzer, are going to be talking us through 6 of the most common mistakes that they see coming up in the discussion chapter of dissertations and theses. This discussion is based on one of the many posts over on the Grad Coach blog, so be sure to check out the blog at gradcoach.com/blog for more research related content, as well as our free dissertation mini course. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your dissertation, thesis, or research project, be sure to check out our private coaching service where we hold your hand through every stage of the dissertation or thesis writing process. You can learn more about that and book a free consultation with one of our friendly coaches over at gradcoach.com.
So, hey, Ruth, it's great to have you at the Coachcast. Welcome.
Thanks, David. It's so great to be here.
Excellent. So, Ruth, today we're going to be talking about 6 common mistakes that we see with the discussion chapter. And the first mistake, and it's one that we see come up quite often, is really mixing up the results and the discussion chapter. So, Ruth, what can we do to help ensure that this doesn't happen?
So I think the first thing we need to do, and you'll hear me mention this throughout this cast, is to really keep in mind the distinction between your discussion chapter and every other part of the thesis, not just the results chapter. For this particular mistake that we see is forgetting or not getting quite right what the purpose of the 2 chapters are. And so it's really important to remember that your results chapter is where you present and you describe the data only. And in your discussion chapter is where you interpret the meaning of your data and you relate it back to the research questions and theory, which we will discuss in a little bit. So it's really important that in your own mind, you are clear on what the intention of each chapter is, because that will help you already not confuse what needs to be done for each of the chapters.
I think that's a great point. It's also worth noting that this does differ between universities. So some universities will have a findings chapter, some universities will have a discussion and conclusion chapter. So really do chat with your supervisor, chat with the university. And if you can't get hold of either of those, take a look at previous theses or dissertations that have been published by your department, because that really helps you get an idea of what the expectation is here.
Absolutely. And I think in this case, as you mentioned now, it's important that sometimes the chapters do need to be combined. And this is something that quite often happens in qualitative research. So this isn't always the case, but due to the nature of certain qualitative projects, sometimes it is required that you discuss your themes, you present your quotes, and then straight away you integrate with literature and previous findings. So that is quite common, but it's by no means prescriptive. So it's always important to check with your supervisor, check with your university, because you don't want to end up diluting anything. You don't want to end up not being consistently clear on what you're trying to do for each of the chapters. And so checking with your institution is really important, as is keeping in mind the goal of each of the chapters.
That's a really great point. And I like what you said about diluting the chapter, because often enough in this mistake that we see, one of the big issues is when you start presenting and describing your results in your discussion chapter, it can often enough feel like a repetition, or that you're not actually engaging or critically synthesizing what your results mean in the context. And so you actually lose that impact that is so important about a discussion chapter. So secondly, we often find when assisting students that they discuss analysis findings that they haven't covered in the results chapter. And this is often a surprise to the reader and can catch your reader or marker off guard. So Ruth, how can we avoid this? How can we make sure that we're presenting a unified story here?
I think the important thing with this, as I've mentioned now, is just to, again, keep in mind what the 2 chapters are. And I'll keep going back to this because I find for most of the time when students are writing and they're struggling, it's because in their own minds they haven't solidified what needs to go where. So they're sort of just plunging in and writing and hoping for the best. And so your results chapter needs to be where you have all your results, and your discussion chapter is where you discuss what these results were. So sometimes what happens is a student will present their results, and when they're doing their discussion chapter, they'll think, oh yes, I remember this was really interesting, or they'll say, they'll bring out a unique finding that perhaps they didn't want to include in the results chapter. And the issue with that then is that the reader's sort of now preparing themselves to learn about what your results mean, and now they're suddenly given new information. So one way to make sure that you're not doing this is to check that you don't have any new tables or graphs. Discussion chapters vary in terms of the way they're structured and the way your supervisor wants you to outline things, but there should be no graphs or tables or pie charts that are not in the results chapter. Because otherwise, again, this comes back to diluting the chapters and just not having that consistency of results and then discussing it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I really also like that point of, making sure that you're not presenting more information, but also not keeping a surprise for later. I know it's something you want to do, like you found a really cool finding, so you want to pop it in right at the end there. But
surprise.
yeah, exactly. But when we think about it, your discussion is, as you said, unpacking what you found. And so you need to make sure that's consistent. And one of the ways that I find is really helpful is what your research questions and hypotheses are going to be. And so you know what data you will need to answer that. And so you just make sure that that line through your story or through your thesis or dissertation is the same, that you're including the necessary information and continuing. Also, don't hesitate to go back and check through your results and discussion. Make sure there's nothing missing either way. You might have presented results that you haven't discussed or vice versa. And so I think that's a really helpful point. Just when you're in that final stage, is just do the extra read through, have it next to each other, or give it to a friend to read through as well, because sometimes we can get a little bit precious, or I think I sometimes do it myself, where I'm so sure of what I've written that I'm a little bit biased in how I assess it.
I always say this, and this is slightly off topic, but it's still applicable, is that no matter what part of your thesis you're working on, if you could ask a friend, especially a friend who hasn't maybe been working closely with you, just to have a look at it, and you'll be surprised, unfortunately, how oftentimes there are gaps that you didn't see, because we fill in the gaps in our minds. When we read something, because we're so in our project, it's so easy to fill in that gap. And especially if you've got, all these results and you think you put everything in, for someone then to say to you, but David, you didn't have a table on this. It can be really helpful just to get that extra opinion, to double check for yourself that you didn't leave anything out, because as you said, that would be a really unfortunate thing to do.
All right, then. For mistake number 3, we see that's having poor linkages to existing literature and your theoretical framework. And now this is really important, because this is the crux of your discussion chapter. So Ruth, give us the lowdown on literature and theoretical frameworks.
David, you are absolutely correct. Remember, with your discussion section, you've done this thesis, you've gone from the beginning with this, which is your introduction, all the way through to where we are now. And basically your discussion section is bringing that full circle back to the introduction, okay? And we're going to talk about the research questions and objectives in a bit. But when it comes to the theory and the frameworks, you would have written about existing literature. And so what you're doing in your discussion section by linking it back is going and saying, I've gone all the way and done all of this research. What does this mean in context of what's already been done? And so a really, really important thing to do and to not skimp out on is to link your findings back with literature. Okay, you will hopefully have done an in-depth enough literature review. Of course, this will depend on your requirements in terms of if you're doing an undergrad or honors or a PhD, but you will hopefully have read enough that you have a good idea of the lay of the land of your field. And so when you look at your findings, we need to understand what your findings mean in context of literature. If you find, for example, that puppies make people feel happier, which is a great finding, and I can attest to that. It's a great finding, but we need to know, what is this telling us in context of what's already been found? Is this a new finding? Is this adding more support to what we already know? Are we adding to the fact that in South Africa or in America or in Australia, this is a new finding now? So this going back is really, really crucial to really contextualizing your results. And something that's important to remember when you're writing your findings and when you're writing your discussion section and you're contextualizing your findings is you need to almost envision yourself as being at the level of the authors that you're writing or referring back to. Now, this sounds a little bit almost arrogant to say, but I'll explain why I'm saying it. Oftentimes, students will write the discussion section and they'll find something and they'll say, well, this is significant because so-and-so author found this, which is not the case. It's significant because you did a good research project and you found what you found. And so when you're contextualizing back into literature, you're not using literature to say, well, because this person found it, this is why I found it. You're saying, this person found this, I'm finding something that is at almost the same level in terms of finding. So you're agreeing with, not using their finding as a reason for your own finding. So mentally, even if you're doing a bachelor's thesis and you're doing all undergrad work, your findings need to be viewed in your own mind as equal, if you want to put it that way, to what you have found. So you're integrating and contextualizing, and you're saying, well, you know what, even if this was just a bachelor's thesis, I found something that we can now add to the literature, and you integrate it back like that. So it's really, really important that the literature is not forgotten by the time you get to the discussion chapter.
I think that's such a good point, and it's definitely something that comes up. One of the other cases that I know that this comes up with is when students find results that don't agree with the literature, and then you get really worried. But as we've mentioned before, the data is what the data is.
Absolutely.
What you found is what you found. Absolutely. And so then the onus is on you to figure out why that might be the case. Maybe it's something specifically about your research context. Maybe it's something you might have missed in your lit review. So you really want to go back and take a look at what's happening again in the field, particularly at the PhD level where, you know, you're doing this over 3 to 4 years. Papers are going to be published, new information is going to come to light. So just make sure to take a look at that and then relate to it. So if you don't find support in the literature, you could say, these findings from this study are in contrast to the findings of A, B, and C. It might be as a result of X, Y, and Z, and then you refer to some literature to support that. And so that's really an important aspect to do.
Absolutely, David. And I think especially when you are maybe at bachelor level, not PhD level, and it's the first time you're doing research, it's possible, and it happens quite often, especially in smaller sample sizes, that you don't find significant findings. We're talking about quant research now. And it's very easy to not find these findings and think, I've done terrible research. And that's not the case. Just to add to what you said, David, is the fact that sometimes there's nothing to find because there's nothing to find. And in this particular sample, whatever it was that you were testing or investigating, it just wasn't the case with these people. Remember, people are weird, wonderful, and unique. And so if what you found contradicts what literature says, as you said, you can go and look at the elements of your study. Perhaps there were various methodological limitations, or there were, various things about your study that resulted in the findings that you did. But you don't need to almost make yourself feel bad if your findings don't agree with literature. To add to this is the fact that, remember, science progresses because of contrary findings. And so although your study maybe is not going to revolutionize the field, different findings and countering findings are exactly what moves science forward. So keep that in mind when you do find something that maybe differs, that it's not bad research necessarily. It could just be that you are finding something new. Or, as I said, maybe there just was nothing to find with those particular people.
Mistake number 4 is quite similar to the previous mistake, and that's when students have poor linkages to their research question, aims, and research objectives. And now this is really important because it is core to your project. It's what you set out to do, and your discussion is really about interpreting those results of what you set out to do. So Ruth, how can we ensure that we have clear linkages to these research questions, aims, and objectives?
David, yes, thank you. You are completely correct about the fact that linking back to the beginning of the dissertation is absolutely key. As I mentioned, you start at the beginning of the project, you set out to achieve something, and then your discussion section is where you reflect back and tell the reader or the examiner how you managed to set out or how you managed to achieve what you set out to achieve. Now, something I like to do, I'm not all that old, but I like to do it old school, is I actually like to write out on a piece of paper what I aim to do, what my aims, what my objectives, what my research questions were. And I stick it somewhere in my office. And the reason for this is for me having it in paper, having it hard copy next to my computer, it really helps me mentally link back to everything that I'm doing. If you are more tech savvy and you prefer not to do it that way, you can always just keep scrolling back. That's up to you. But it's all about keeping it clear in your mind. And so if you can keep a clear version of what you set out to do, your discussion section then will be much easier to frame and to outline because you will have these initial aims in mind. And it's also important, as we spoke about with the literature, that you aim to find out something. And even if what you found out is different from what you thought you would find out, you still found out something. And so again, whatever you found out and whatever your results were, whether you're rejecting or failing to reject hypotheses, whether you are simply answering research questions, keeping these clear for you will really help you structure your your discussion section in a more logical and complete manner.
I think that's an excellent point. I also really agree with what you said about having it written on a piece of paper. I still also go back to that as well in terms of when I'm structuring a chapter. I write down a basic outline of what I set out to do, and that's where I jot down my research questions or aims or specific objectives so that I know I'm hitting those points. I do the same thing for the results chapter as well.
Absolutely.
Similarly, as well, with your research questions, it's important that you top and tail your discussion with the coverage of what you've set up. So you start the discussion with your main findings, and then you end by, again, linking back to what you found, because that's really what helps to contextualize your research and put it into context and make a cohesive story all the way from your introduction all the way through your discussion and to your conclusion chapter.
And just to add to that, the idea of the golden thread, I hate that term because it seems like it's something that's so elusive, but it is such an important term. And at the end of the day, your aims, objectives, and research questions are the thread of your golden thread. And so keeping that in mind, if you're just referring back to that, you will automatically create this golden thread because you will be linking back to what you initially set out to do. Your aims, objectives, research questions really are the guiding force of your thesis. And so by the time you get to this chapter, reflecting on them, as you said, topping and tailing with it will just naturally help you present this chapter in a cohesive, logical, and golden thread manner.
So for mistake number 5, another common one we see is that there is poor structure and flow. And this links exactly to what we were saying for the previous question. It's all about moving through your discussion in a logical, smooth, and a way that makes sense. So Ruth, what can we do to get this right?
Again, I like to think of going back to the beginning and getting your mind in the right place. So although you may have just written the results chapter, one example of how not to have a poor structure is imagine your discussion chapter like you're telling your friend the gossip from the night before. Okay, and so whatever it was, you went out to some place and you saw some drama happening. When you're telling your friend or your boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever what happened, you don't start halfway through the story. You don't start with a weird abstract part of it. You start with setting the scene. And so the actual structure of your discussion section could differ, but imagine your discussion section like that, where you're telling a story about what you found, you're contextualizing it, and so you have to go in a logical progression of what you found so that the reader is able to follow. Nothing annoys a reader or examiner more than having to flip or scroll back and forth to try and see what was being said. So whether you structure it according to research question, per variable, or by some structure that your university has given you, keep that structure. Something I find quite helpful is your research questions would have been laid out in a logical fashion. Your results would have been presented in a logical fashion. So it's usually quite easy to keep a similar structure that you had for your results section and just use that in your discussion section. Now, this is where it can, the flow can fall apart, because it's very easy then to start repeating findings because you're following the same structure as your findings. So for example, if in your results chapter, you spoke about a significant finding and you mentioned your t-crit value, your t-observed value, your degrees of freedom, your p-value, all of that, in your discussion chapter, you're not going to repeat that. You're simply going to say, there was this X and Y finding, and then you will contextualize in literature. So you keep the same structure, and you may cross-reference back to your results in this regard, but you don't copy and paste from your results chapter into this section. You synthesize and summarize what you found, and then go straight into the discussion of the literature. And so I find keeping that structure is quite helpful, because my results were presented in a way that made sense to me, and so therefore my discussion chapter will be presented in a way that makes sense and it flows nicely. This is not the only way of doing it. As always, the university sometimes has requirements, and even within a university, supervisors have different requirements. So always check that, but this is just one way I find helps me with the logic of the chapter.
That's a really great point, Ruth. And again, I will reiterate what you say. Supervisors differ in how they write this. So I know when I was studying, I had a supervisor that would tell me, why are you starting with the boring stuff? You know, and so he would suggest putting your main or most exciting finding first and then working through it. And so obviously that's a different structure to the research question or theme style discussion, but it's important to either way make sure the connections between your paragraphs and your sections are clearly laid out. What I like to always use is linking sentences and leading sentences. So a leading sentence is the first sentence in a paragraph or section that really sets the scene for what's going to be covered. And then a transition sentence is the last sentence in your paragraph or section. And it's really about making that connection from one theme or idea to the next. Sometimes that connection isn't super clear, and so you might need to do a little bit more work to get that connection there, but it's still massively important because it takes it from being a collection of ideas to a cohesive story.
On that, when you talk about the linking sentences, a resource that is free and available, and I highly recommend it. It's called the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank, and it's a free resource, and essentially on that page, it tells you if you were trying to draw similarities, and it gives suggestions for kinds of phrases you could use. And they're all academic. So furthermore, in addition, similarly, consequently, it's a really great resource. So if you're saying, I know I need to link two similar ideas, but I've got no idea what word to use, it just helps you. And even if you don't use it throughout your entire dissertation, it just gives you a nice kickstart to get used to the kinds of words and phrases that you can use. Because as you said, neither your literature review nor your discussion section should read like paragraphs were written in different days and just put together. It needs to read like a story. And so your transition and your leading sentences are exceptionally important.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Ruth. And I really love that source, particularly as someone who struggled with using however too many times in my dissertation, moreover. So that's definitely a good point. The other thing to keep in mind is that, like any piece of literature, you've got to have an introduction and conclusion to your discussion chapter. You need something that sort of introduces what will be covered and the main points. And then again, you need to tail it with that coverage. And relating back to our previous point, often enough, a good example is to go back to your primary research questions or your aims. And it's just a really nice way of keeping it concise and condensed and finding that golden thread, as you said. So our last mistake, number 6, is when your discussion chapter starts spilling into your conclusion chapter. And it's worth noting there is different universities that have different requirements. So it's always something to check with your supervisor and your university. But the reason we don't want to do this is because it dilutes the chapter. So Ruth, what can we do to ensure that we're keeping your discussion distinctly discussion?
I think this is one of the harder parts because the discussion, because of the fact that we're linking our findings back to literature, it can be very tempting to move into a concluding way of writing. And so I think, as you mentioned, David, the fact that different universities have got different requirements, I think a really important thing to do is to first set out for yourself what you need to do in the conclusion chapter. This might sound counterintuitive, but I have logic to this. If you find out what needs to be in the conclusion chapter, then you almost have yourself a framework, and we'll talk about the conclusion chapter in another video. You have a framework for what needs to go there. So when you're writing your discussion chapter, you're not tempted to try and squeeze things in that belong in the conclusion chapter because you really want to say them. When you are writing your findings up and you're writing your discussion, often really great thoughts come to mind, recommendations for future research come up to mind. And in an effort not to forget them, sometimes it's easy to accidentally put them in the discussion chapter. So that's why I say find out from your university what they want in the conclusion chapter. And when you have these cool thoughts of, limitations, future recommendations, you just pop them into a little Word document that you've got on one hand, that you know you've got them somewhere. Because ultimately, this last mistake that we're talking about is less of something you need to do as it is something you need to not do. And so your discussion chapter by this stage has already been written. And so really just keep in your own mind what needs to go where. And if you're not sure, just write it down and check with your supervisor and put it in a piece of paper, and you could say, should this go here, should this go there? But clarifying at the outset what needs to go where will really help you keep your thoughts in 2 different locations at the same time of not losing any valuable thoughts and insights you might have.
I think that's a really great point, especially because when we are in this discussion conclusion chapter, that's really when you're tying your research together. And it's really hard to keep that thought process separate because it is part of the process of when you're discussing a finding that you come up with recommendations that will come up from it, that you will be thinking about what future studies should do. And so having that Word document to the side is really helpful for really just partitioning that information out. And I think that's a great point. The other thing is to just remember, as we spoke about at the start of the video, know what your discussion chapter is for and what you need to talk about. In most of the case, it's often enough putting your research into context with the literature and with your theoretical framework. It's not too much about challenging or going too far into the future. It's really about exploring what you found. But it isn't an easy task, but I hope we've given some advice that can help. Ruth, it's been absolutely wonderful having you at the Coachcast. You've given us some great things to think about. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, David. This was lots of fun, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.
Alright, so that pretty much wraps up this episode of Grad Coach TV. Remember, you can get more free dissertation and thesis and research related content over at the Grad Coach blog, and you can also get access to our comprehensive free dissertation mini course. That's over at gradcoach.com/blog. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your research project, dissertation, or thesis, remember to check out our private coaching service where we hold your hand through each stage of the process. You can book a free consultation with one of our friendly coaches over at gradcoach.com. So that's all for today. Until next time, good luck.